Get ready to dive into a story that will invite us to think more deeply about the world, ourselves, and the meaning of everything around us. Don't forget to prepare a comfortable place, calm your mind, and let's start this journey together. Gilberto sat staring down at the table. He finally turned and looked out of the window. "It's clouding over," said Sophie. "Yes, it's muggy. Are you going to talk about Berkeley?" He was the next of the three British empresses, but as he is in the category of his own many ways, we will first concentrate on David Hume, who lived from 1711 to 1776. He stands out as the most important of the empresses. He is also significant as the person who set the great philosopher Immanuel Kant on the road to his philosophy. Doesn't it matter to you that I'm more interested in Berkeley philosophy? That's of no importance. Hume grew up near Edinburgh in Scotland. His family wanted him to take up law, but he felt an insurmountable resistance to everything but philosophy and learning. He lived in the age of enlightenment at the same time as great French thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, and he traveled widely in Europe before returning to settle down in Edinburgh toward the end of his life. His main work, A Treatise of Human Nature, was published when Hume was 28 years old, but he claimed that he got the idea for the book when he was only 15. "I see, I don't have any time to waste. You have already begun. But if I were going to formulate my own philosophy, it will be quite different from anything I've heard up to now. Is there anything in particular that's missing?" "Well, to start with, all the philosophers you have talked about are men, and men seem to live in a world of their own. I am more interested in the real world, where there are flowers and animals and children that are born and grow up. Your philosophers are always talking about men and humans, and now here's another treatise on human nature. It's as if this human is the middle-aged man. I mean, life begins with pregnancy and birth, and I've heard nothing about the uppers or crying babies so far, and hardly anything about love and friendship. You are right, of course, but Hume was a philosopher who thought in a different way. More than any other philosopher, he took the everyday world as his starting point. I even think Hume had a strong feeling for the way children, the new citizens of the world, experience life. I'd better listen to and embraces. Hume took it upon himself to clean up all the woolly concepts and thought construction that this male philosopher had invented. There were piles of the old records, both written and spoken, from the Middle Ages and the rationalist philosophy of the 17th century. Hume proposed the return to our spontaneous experience of the world. No philosopher will ever be able to take us behind the dull experiences or give us rules of conduct that are different from those we get through reflection on everyday life," he said. "Sounds promising so far. Can you give any examples?" In the time of Hume, there was a widespread belief in angels, that is, human figures with wings. Have you ever seen such a creature, Sophie? "No. But you have seen a human figure?" "Dumb question. You have also seen wings." "Of course, but not on a human figure." So, according to Hume, an angel is a complex idea. It consists of two different experiences which are not in fact related, but which nevertheless are associated in man's imagination. In other words, it is a false idea which must be immediately rejected. We must tidy up all our thoughts and ideas, as well as our book collections, in the same way, or as Hume put it, if we take in our hands any volume, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reason concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence. No, commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. That was drastic. But the world still exists, more frank and sharply outlined than ever. Hume wanted to know how a child experiences the world. Didn't you say that many of the philosophers you have heard about live in their own world, and that you were more interested in the real world? Something like that. Hume could have said the same thing, but let us follow his train of thought more closely. I'm with you. Hume begins by establishing that man has two different types of perceptions, namely impressions and ideas. By impressions, he means the immediate sensation of external reality. By ideas, he means the recollection of such impressions. Could you give me an example? If you burn yourself on a hot oven, you get an immediate impression of the world. You can recollect that you burned yourself. That impression insofar as it is recalled is what Hume calls an idea. The difference is that an impression is stronger and lives earlier than your reflective memory of the impression. You could say that the sensation is the original and that the idea or reflection is only a pale imitation. It is the impression which is the direct cause of the idea stored in the mind. I follow you so far. She emphasized further that both an impression and an idea can be either simple or complex. You remember we talked about an apple in connection with law. The direct experience of an apple is an example of a complex impression. Sorry to interrupt, but is this terribly important? How can you ask? Even though philosophers may have been preoccupied with a number of pseudo-problems, you mustn't give up now over the construction of an argument. Hume would probably agree with Descartes that it is essential to construct a thought process right from the ground. Okay. Hume's point is that we sometimes form complex ideas on which there is no corresponding object in the physical world. We've already talked about angels. Previously, we referred to Crocopond. Another example is Pegasus. We winged horse. In all these cases, we have to admit that the mind has done a good job of cutting out and pasting together all on its own. Each element was one sense, and entered the theater of the mind in the form of a real impression. Nothing is ever actually invented by the mind. The mind puts things together and constructs false ideas. Yes, I see. That is important. Alright then, Hume wanted to investigate every single idea to see whether it was compounded in a way that does not correspond to reality. He asked, from which impression does this idea originate? First of all, he had to find out which single ideas went into the making of a complex idea. This would provide him with a critical method by which to analyze our ideas, and thus enable him to tidy up our thoughts and notions. Do you have an example or two? In Hume's day, there were a lot of people who had very clear ideas of heaven or the New Jerusalem. You remember how Descartes indicated that clear and distinct ideas in themselves could be a guarantee that they corresponded to something that really existed. I said I was not especially forgetful. We should realize that our idea of a heaven is compounded of a great many elements. Heaven is made up of pearly gates, streets of gold, angels, by the score, and so on and so forth. And still we have not broken everything down into single elements. For pearly gates, streets of gold, and angels are all complex ideas in themselves. Only when we recognize that our idea of heaven consists of single notions such as pearl, gate, street, gold, white robe, figure, and wings, can we ask ourselves if we ever really have any simple impressions. We did. but we cut out and passed all simple impressions into the one idea. That's just what we did. Because if there is something we humans do when we visualize, it's use scissors and paths. But Hume emphasized that all the elements we put together in our ideas must at some time have entered the mind in the form of simple impressions. A person who has never seen gold will never be able to visualize streets of gold. It was very clever. What about the cards having a clear and distinct idea of God? Hume had an answer to that too. Let's say we imagine God as an infinitely intelligent, wise, and good being. We have thus a complex idea that consists of something infinitely intelligent, something infinitely wise, and something infinitely good. If we had never known intelligence, wisdom, and goodness, we would never have such an idea of God. Our idea of God might also be that He is a savior by His Father. That is to say, a concept made up of severity, justice, and Father. Many critics of religion since Hume have claimed that such ideas of God can be associated with how we experience our own Father when we were little. It was said that the idea of a father led to the idea of a heavenly Father. Maybe that's true, but I have never accepted that God had to be a man. Sometimes my mother calls God Go River, just to even things out. Anyway, Hume opposed all thought, and ideas that could not be traced back to corresponding sense perceptions. He said he wanted to dismiss all this meaningless nonsense which long has dominated metaphysical thought and brought it into disrepute. But even in everyday life, we use complex ideas without stopping to wonder whether they are valid. For example, take the question of thief or the ego. This was the very basis of Descartes' philosophy. It was the one clear and distinct perception that the whole of his philosophy was belong. I hope Hume didn't try to deny that I am me. He'd be talking off the top of his head, sobbing. If there is one thing I want this course to teach you, it's not to jump to conclusions. Sorry, go on. No, why don't you use Hume's method and analyze what you perceive as your ego? First, I'd have to figure out whether the ego is a single or a complex idea. And what conclusion do you come to? I really have to admit that I feel quite complex. I'm very volatile, for instance, and I have trouble making up my mind about things. And I can both like and dislike the same people. In the other words, the ego concept is a complex idea. Okay, so now I guess I must figure out if I have had the corresponding complex impression of my own ego, and I guess I have. I always have, actually. Does that worry you? I'm very changeable. I'm not the same today as I was when I was 4 years old. The temperament and how I see myself alter from one minute to the next. I can suddenly feel like I am a new person. So the feeling of having an unalterable ego is a false perception. The perception of the ego is in reality a long chain of single impressions that you have never experienced simultaneously. It is nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed one another with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. As Hume expressed it, the mind is a kind of mingle in an infinite variety of postures and situations. Hume pointed out that we have no underlying personal identity beneath or behind these perceptions and feelings, which come and go. It is just like the image on a movie screen. They change so rapidly, we do not register that the film is made up of single pictures. In reality, the pictures are not connected. The film is a collection of instants. I think I give in. Does that mean you give up the idea of having an unalterable ego? I guess it does. A moment ago, you believed the opposite. I should add that Hume's analysis of the human mind and his rejection of the unalterable ego was put forward almost 2,500 years earlier on the other side of the world. Hume by Buddha. It's almost uncanny how similarly the two formulate ideas. Buddha saw life as an unbroken succession of mental and physical processes, which keep people in a continual state of change. The infant is not the same as the adult. I am not the same today as I was yesterday. There is nothing of which I can say this is mine, said Buddha, and nothing of which I can say this is me. There is thus no the or unalterable ego. Yes, that was typically Hume. In continuation of the idea of an unalterable ego, many rationalists had taken it for granted that man had an eternal soul. Is that a false perception too? According to Hume and Buddha, yes. Do you know what Buddha said to his followers just before he died? No, how could I? Decay is inherent in all compound things. Work your own salvation with diligence. Hume could have said the same thing, or Democritus, for that matter. We know that at all, even that Hume rejected an attempt to prove the immortality of the soul or the existence of God. That does not mean that he ruled out either one, but to prove religious faith. But Hume's reason was rationalistic claptrap. He thought he was not a Christian, neither was he a confirmed atheist. He was what we call an agnostic. What's that? An agnostic is someone who holds that the existence of God or a God can neither be proved nor disproved. When he was dying, a friend asked him if he believed in life after death. He said to have answered, "It is also possible that a knob of coal placed upon the fire will not burn." I see. The answer was typical of his unconditional open-mindedness. He only accepted what he had perceived through his senses. He had all other possibilities open. He rejected neither faith in Christianity nor faith in miracles, but both were matters of faith, not knowledge or reason. You might say that with Hume philosophy, the final link between faith and knowledge was broken. You say she didn't deny that miracles can happen? That didn't mean that he believed in them, more the opposite. He made a point of the fact that people seem to have a powerful deed of what we today would call supernatural happenings. The thing is, that all the miracles you hear or have always happened in some far distant place or long. Long time ago, actually, Hume only rejected miracles because he had never experienced any. But he had no experience that they couldn't have neither. You'll have to explain that. According to Hume, a miracle is against the laws of nature, but it is meaningless to allege that we have experienced the laws of nature. We experienced that the stone falls to the ground when we let go of it, and if it didn't fall, well, then we experienced that I would say that was a miracle or something supernatural. So, you believe there are two natures, a natural and a supernatural? Maybe, but I still think the stone will fall to the ground every time I let go. Why? Now you're being horrible. I'm not horrible, Sophie. It's never wrong for a philosopher to ask questions. You may be getting to the crux of Hume's philosophy. Tell me how you can be so certain that the stone will always fall to earth. I've seen it happen so many times that I'm absolutely certain. Hume would say that you have experienced a stone falling to the ground many times, but you have never experienced that it will always fall. It is usual to say that the stone falls to the ground because of the law of gravitation, but we have never experienced such a law. We have only experienced that things fall. Isn't that the same thing? Not completely. You say you believe the stone will fall to the ground because you have seen it happen so many times. That's exactly Hume's point. You are so used to the one thing following the other that you expect the same to happen every time you let go of a stone. This is the way the concept of what we like to call the unbreakable laws of nature arises. Did he really mean it was possible that the stone would not fall? He was probably just as convinced as you that it would fall every time. He was probably just as convinced as you that it would fall every time he tried it. But he pointed out that he had not experienced what it happens. Now, we're far away from babies and flowers again. No, on the contrary, you are welcome to take children as Hume's edification. Who do you think will be more surprised if the stone floated above the ground for an hour or two? You are a 1-year-old child? I guess I would. Why? Because I would know better than the child how unnatural it was. And why wouldn't the child think it was unnatural? Because it hasn't yet learned how nature behaves. Or perhaps because nature hasn't yet become a habit. I see where you're coming from. You wanted people to sharpen their awareness. So now, do the following exercise. Let's say you and a small child go to the magic show where things are meant to float in the air. Which of you will have the most fun? I probably would. And why would that be? Because I would know how impossible it all is. So, for the child, it's no fun to see the laws of nature being defied before it has learned what they are. I guess that's right. And we are still at the crux of Hume's philosophy of experience. He would have added that the child has not yet become a slave of the expectation of habit. He is thus the more open-minded of the two. I wonder if the child is not also the greater philosopher. He comes utterly without preconceived opinions, and that, my dear Sophie, is the philosopher's most distinguished virtue. The child perceives the world as it is, without putting more into things than he experienced. Every time I feel prejudice, I get a bad feeling. When Hume discusses the force of habit, he concentrates on the law of causation. This law establishes that everything that happens must have a cause. Hume used two billiard balls for his example. If you roll a black billiard ball against a white one that is at rest, what will the white one do? If the black ball hits the white one will start to move. I see it. And why will it do that? Because it was hit by the black one. So, we usually say that the impact of the black ball is the cause, or the white ball starting to move. But remember now, we can only talk of what we have actually experienced. I have actually experienced it lots of times. Joanna has a pool table in her basement. Hume would say the only thing you have experienced is that the white ball begins to roll across the table. You have not experienced the actual cause of it beginning to roll. You have experienced that one event comes after the other, but you have not experienced that the other event happens because the first one. Isn't that splitting hairs? No, it's very central. Hume emphasized that the expectation of one thing following another does not lie in the things themselves, but in our mind. An expectation, as we have seen, is associated with habit. Going back to the child again, it will not have terror and amazement if when one billiard ball struck the other, both had remained perfectly motionless. When we speak of the laws of nature, or of cause and effect, we are actually speaking of what we expect, rather than what is reasonable. The laws of nature are neither reasonable nor unreasonable. They simply are. The expectation that the white billiard ball will move when it is struck by the black billiard ball is therefore not in it. We are not born with a set of expectations as to what the world is like or how things in the world we have. The world is like it is, and it's something we get to know. I'm beginning to feel as if we are getting off the track again. Note, if our expectation caused us to jump to conclusions, Hume did not deny the existence of unbreakable natural laws, but he held that because we are not in a position to experience the natural laws themselves, we can easily come to the wrong conclusions. Like what? Well, because I have seen a whole herd of black horses doesn't mean that all horses are black. No, of course not. And although I have seen nothing but black crows in my life, it doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a white crow. But for a philosopher and for a scientist, it can be important not to reject the possibility of finding a white crow. You might almost say that hunting for the white crow is science's principal task. Yes, I see. In the question of cause and effect, there can be many people who imagine that lightning is the cause of thunder because the thunder comes after the lightning. The example is really not so different from the one with the billiard balls. But is lightning the cause of thunder? Not really, because actually they both happen at the same time. Both thunder and lightning are due to an electric discharge, so in reality a third factor causes them both. Right. An empirist of our own century, Bertrand Russell, has provided a more grotesque example. A chicken which experiences every day that it gets fed. When the farmer's wife comes over to the chicken run, will finally come to the conclusion that there is a causal link between the approach of the farmer's wife and feed being put into its bowl. But one day the chicken doesn't get its food. No, one day the farmer's wife comes over and wrings the chicken's neck. Yuck, how disgusting. The fact that one thing follows after another does not necessarily mean there is a causal link. One of the main concerns of philosophy is to warn people against jumping to conclusions. It can in fact lead to many different forms of superstition. How come? You see a black cat cross the street. Later that day, you fall and break your arm. But it doesn't mean there is any causal link between the two incidents. In science, it is especially important not to jump to conclusions. For instance, the fact that a lot of people get well after taking a particular drug doesn't mean it was the drug that cured them. That's why it's important to have a large control group of patients who think they are also being given the same medicine, but who are in fact only being given flour and water. And these patients also get well. There has to be a third factor, such as the belief that the medicine works and has cured them. I think I'm beginning to see what empiricism is. Hume also rebelled against rationalist thought in the area of ethics. The rationalists had always held that the ability of distinguish between right and wrong is inherent in human reason. We have come across this idea of a so-called natural right in many philosophers from Socrates to Locke. But according to Hume, it is not reason that determines what we say and do. What is it then? It is our sentiments. If you decide to help someone in need, you do so because of your feelings, not your reason. What if I can't be bothered to help? That too would be a matter of feelings. It is neither reasonable nor unreasonable not to help someone in need, but it could be unkind. But there must be a limit somewhere. Everyone knows it's wrong to kill. According to Hume, everybody has a feeling for other people's welfare. So we all have a capacity for compassion, but it has nothing to do with reason. I don't know if I agree. It's not always so unwise to get rid of another person, Sophie. If you wish to achieve something or other, it can actually be quite a good idea. Hey, wait a minute, I protest. Maybe you can try and explain why one shouldn't kill a troublesome person. That person wants to live too. Therefore, you ought not to kill them. Was that a logical reason? I don't know. What you did was to draw a conclusion from a descriptive sentence. The person wants to live too, to what we call a normative sentence, therefore you ought not to kill them. From the point of view of reason, this is nonsense. You might just as well say there are lots of people who cheat on their taxes. Therefore I ought to cheat on my taxes too. Hume said you can never draw conclusion from a sentence to a sentence. Nevertheless, it is exceedingly common, not least in newspaper articles, political party programs, and speeches. Would you like some examples? Please. More and more people want to travel by air. Therefore, more airports ought to be built. Do you think the conclusion holds up? No, it's nonsense. We have to think of the environment. I think we ought to build more railroads instead. Or they say, the development of new oil fields will raise the population living standards by 10%. Therefore, we ought to develop new oil fields as rapidly as possible. Definitely not. We have to think of the environment again. And anyway, the standard of living in Norway is high enough. Sometimes it is said that this law has been passed by the Senate. Therefore, all citizens in this country ought to abide by it. But frequently it goes against people's deepest convictions to abide by such conventions. Yes, I understand that. So we have established that we cannot use reason as a yardstick for how we ought to act. Acting responsibly is not a matter of strengthening our reason but of deepening our feelings for the welfare of others. This not contrary to reason to prevent destruction of the whole world to the stretching of my finger, said Hume. This is a hair-raising assertion. It's maybe even more hair-raising if you shuffle the cards. You know that the Nazis murdered millions of Jews. Would you say that there was something wrong with the Nazi's reason, or would you say there was something wrong with their emotional life? There was definitely something wrong with their feelings. Many of them were exceedingly clear-headed. It is not unusual to find ice-cold calculation behind the most callous decisions. Many of the Nazis were convicted after the war, but they were not convicted for being unreasonable. They were convicted for being presumed murderers. It can happen that people who are not of sound mind can be acquitted of their crimes. We say that they were not uncountable for their action. Nobody has ever been acquitted of a crime they committed for being unfilled. I should hope not, but we need not stick to the most grotesque examples. If a flood disaster renders millions of people homeless, it is our feelings that determine whether we come to their aid. If we are callous and leave the whole thing to cold reason, we might think it was actually quiet in order that millions of people die, and leave the whole thing to cold reason. We might think it was actually quiet in order that millions of people died in a war that is threatened by overpopulation. It makes me mad that you can even think that. And notice it's not your reason that gets mad. Okay, I got it. What will happen next? How will Sophie deal with her deepening question? Find out in the next episode.